While there are many players that were electric in their own rights, none comes close to what Cam Newton brought to the gridiron every Sunday. From doing his signature super cam move to popularizing the dab, Cam Newton was a player for the people. He brought unmatched energy every Sunday. Don't believe me? Just watch this video and maybe you will. A little backstory on Cam Newton though, right before we jump into this, is that he was born on May 11th of 1989. He was born in Atlanta to the son of former NFL player Cecil Newton Jr. Well, technically senior, because he also had an older brother that I didn't know about called Cecil Newton Jr. that played in the NFL. So he had two people in the NFL that were actually his family that I didn't even know that they existed, to be honest with you. Growing up, Newton loved baseball and basketball, but eventually he ended up with a fear of being hit by a pitch, and I can't blame him there. He also got into extensive foul trouble in basketball, causing him to switch to football. It was a good choice, because in just his junior year, he would throw for 2,500 yards and rush for 638 yards with a combined 32 touchdowns, which was more than enough to get him scouted. His size was also a factor in his recruiting prospect, being 6'5" and 235 pounds. He was ranked primarily around the early teens in recruiting ranks, essentially, which was more than enough to get him to the University of Florida, which is more commonly known to us fans as the Florida Gators. College started out kind of rough for Newton, not being the starter and being used as more of a plug-and-play guy, and his stats weren't fantastic early years of college, but you can't expect him to be great if you're not playing. Outside of just football, Cam Newton had off-field problems as well. Nothing incredibly serious, but enough to get him suspended from the team. Newton would go on to get hurt in his sophomore season, causing him to take a redshirt season, which pretty much just says, hey, I ain't playing because of this injury, and they extend your eligibility by a year. How do you think Stetson Bennett could play until he was like 40? Jokes aside, Newton would announce his transfer to Blinn College, which is a junior college, or JUCO. He exceeded expectations with an amazing season, throwing for 2,833 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 655 rushing yards. He became the most heavily recruited JUCO quarterback in the country and would sign with the Auburn Tigers the year after. Newton was a different breed in Auburn. In 2010, he had everything to prove, and he had more than proved himself. In his first and only season with Auburn, Newton would lead them to winning the college football championship, breaking so many records along the way. A few of note are, he became the first ever SEC player to have 2,000 pass yards and 1,000 rush yards in the same season, and he broke the record for the most rushing yards by a QB in the SEC. His stats for the season are as follows: 2,854 passing yards, 7 interceptions, 1,473 rush yards, and 51 total touchdowns. Again, this is all in one season. Including a receiving touchdown, funnily enough, Newton would win the Heisman in a landslide victory, with Andrew Luck finishing behind him. And by right behind, I mean 1,200 points behind. He would win many other awards that year as well as you can possibly imagine. This single year of Auburn was more than enough to get him talked about as the consensus #1 overall pick in the NFL draft, where the Carolina Panthers would select Newton. Newton would not take long at all to just get settled into the NFL landscape. I mean, a lot of people typically have that little bump that they have to get over to becoming an NFL athlete from college, but not for Newton. Newton went straight to the NFL and had a career game. In fact, probably one of his best career games, if not his best career game of all time. In just his first career game, Cam threw for 422 yards and 2 touchdowns in his first career game. That's honestly astonishing if you ask me. Well, I gotta stop the video for just a second because today we're not actually sponsored by anybody, but I do want to give a shout out to one of my better friends. If you guys are interested in sports cards or buying sports cards at all, then you guys probably know of the app called What's Not. Again, this is not a paid sponsor at all. I'm just giving a shout out to somebody that I care about. Now, my friend has a stream that he does on Whatnot, and he sells cards, he does giveaways. He's a really good guy, and you can guarantee that you're going to get your cards. And he's trustworthy. I'm going to put his name on screen right here. And also, I'm going to leave his Whatnot description or link down in the description below. If you guys could check him out, maybe even give him a follow, I would appreciate y'all. And thank y'all. Back to the video. Rushing yards were a non-factor, but he would pick up yet another touchdown on the ground. That was just a spark for the new start of a fire, which would unveil us to the Cam that we knew. In his rookie campaign, Cam threw for 4,000 yards, rushed for 700 yards, and had a combined 35 touchdowns and 17 interceptions, which is a lot, but this would be the highest mark of interceptions in his career. Despite this year, the Panthers were so atrocious that they still went 6-10. Newton won Offensive Rookie of the Year and was selected to a Pro Bowl. His next 3 seasons of game would be pretty consistent, throwing for 10,375 yards, rushing for 1,865 rushing yards, and 80 touchdowns to 37 interceptions. Finally, we get to his MVP season, 2015. Newton had an incredible year, having his best passing year ever, throwing for 3,837 yards and 35 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions. And again, rushing, 636 rushing yards, 10 more touchdowns on the ground, all while leading the Panthers to a whopping 15-1 record and a Super Bowl appearance. As I already mentioned, Cam would win MVP this season, and he would also win Offensive Player of the Year and be selected to his one and only All-Pro team. 1 year removed from Cam Newton's best season of all time and his MVP season, the Super Bowl appearance, Cam Newton would essentially just fall off a cliff. He statistically had the best year of his career, turned around and had the worst statistical year of his career when it comes in terms of him actually playing the entire season or starting games. Newton would only play in 14 games and go 6-8 in that frame, missing the playoffs and having a bad statistical year as well, throwing for just about 3,500 yards, 19 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. And in the run game, he would have his worst season rushing ever, excluding 2019 and 2021, where he played less than half the games, rushing for a mere 360 yards, which is not the Cam that we knew and loved. Unfortunately, 2016 would be the beginning to his eventual decline. While he would stay the starting quarterback for the Panthers until 2018, he would never pass for more than 3,500 yards in a season, and he would also never have more than 25 passing touchdowns again. And while he would lead the Panthers to the playoffs in 2017, nothing would ever come close to the 2015 season again. In 2020, just 5 years removed from one of the most spectacular seasons I've ever seen, Newton would go on to be cut by the Panthers after Newton failed to find a trade partner. Newton would end up signing with the Patriots that same year for a minimum contract of just over $1 million. The Patriots, who had just recently lost Tom Brady, had hoped that bringing in Newton would keep their playoff and Super Bowl chances high, but in fact, it did not. Cam would go on to have a bad year for the Pats, throwing 10 interceptions to his 8 touchdowns, but would return to prime rushing form with 600 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns on the ground. Newton would get cut and re-signed with the Panthers the following season, but had a truly bad start to his year, leading the Panthers to an 0-5 record, having just under 700 yards and 4 touchdowns in those games. Now, personally, I don't think Cam Newton is to blame for everything that happened here. I think that this should be kind of like a mix of everything. Yes, Newton did fall off, and yes, Newton just pretty much rapidly declined, but I do think that the situation of which he was in was never good enough after 2015. I think everything just kind of went downhill for him, including himself. Cam regressed, but so did the teams that he played for. And in my opinion, if you had given him a good team all around, at least until 2019, he could have led your team to a Super Bowl. Cam's infamous for his Super Bowl meltdown, but in recent lights, Von Miller, Super Bowl 50 MVP, said that if the Broncos had faced the Panthers 10 times, they would have been lucky to win it twice. What's crazy to me is how much bad rap Newton gets for giving his all every Sunday and bringing energy to the game that's based on energy and spirit. He was a great leader, and he sparked a lot of will and even fun into his team. As always, I'm going to leave you guys with a question. What do you think Cam Newton could have done with better teams earlier in his career? Thank you all for watching. It's been a pleasure, and I'm out.